Hi, everyone, and welcome to the fifth event in this Building World-Class Team series on the leadership habits you need to develop as a founder. I'm going to give a moment as people are still joining, and then we'll kick off shortly. Now before we get started, I'd like to get a bit of housekeeping out of the way first. This webinar is being recorded. Uh, Captions are available throughout the webinar. If you'd like to enable them, there should be an option on the bottom tab of Zoom or in the menu by clicking the three dots icon. Chat is open, so feel free to talk to us or amongst yourselves and pop a hello in there if you'd like. We are moderating it to keep this a safe space, and any inappropriate messages will be removed. If you have any questions for us, make sure to drop it into the Q&A next to chat. There'll be an opportunity for us to answer your questions during the event, but feel free to drop a question at any time. A quick hello from us. I'm Adnan. I'm the delivery manager and data analyst at the Honeycomb Works. For today, I'll be in the background running the event and managing the tech. So if you run into any issues, please let me know by dropping a question into chat. But otherwise, I'll now hand over to Melissa to get us officially started. Over
Thanks
to you,
so much.
Melissa.
Thank you, Adnan, and thank you everyone for joining us. And hi to Michael from Cardiff. Thank you so much for joining the chat and kicking us off there. We would very much love your participation throughout this. So please do say hi and let us know a little bit about you. I'm Melissa. I'm the founder and CEO of the Honeycomb Works. And I would like to introduce you to our guest speaker today. Brian, would you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Evia. I help people and organizations lead change and growth by aligning leadership, strategy, culture, HR operations, mission, vision, whatever else needs to happen along their journey. And it's really nice to be again here with Melissa.
Thanks so much, Brian. And I am thrilled to be here with Brian because he's somebody that I've been speaking to for a few years now, every so often. And every time I speak to him, I get another nugget of wisdom about leadership. And I think about things a little bit differently. So I'm absolutely confident that you're going to get some good nuggets and things today. So thank you, Brian, for joining us. For those that don't know us, just a little bit about who we are. So we are the Honeycomb Works, and our mission is for everyone at work to feel like they belong and are free to invent. We help organizations build inclusive and innovative cultures through behavior change and data, because cultures are created habit by habit, person by person. It's the things that people do on a day-to-day basis or don't do that make someplace safe for everyone to speak up, share ideas, and challenge each other to do brilliant things. And we have a platform. It looks like a honeycomb, for hence the name. For startups and scale-ups, that platform is Culture Plus. And I know we've got some members of the Culture Plus community here with us today, but some who are not. And so just really quickly, the platform helps people develop positive habits individually, and it also helps organization understand their strengths and biggest areas of risk. So we'll be talking about a few of the cells today. So I just wanted to give you some context. And when I say that, I don't mean you have to know about the platform, but the concept of the honeycomb is important as we drill into habits, because we think about everything through habits. And as I said, it's because it's these things that we do on a day-to-day basis. This is what research tells us. This is what evidence tells us. And each of the hexagons or cells in a honeycomb has 4 very specific habits that if you put into practice, research tells us you will create these positive cultures. And if a critical mass of folks in your organization do that same thing, you'll have that positive culture. So that's where we like to end up, give you things that you will actually do a bit differently after this webinar and go ahead to drive change in your own organizations. But before we go any further, we'd love to learn a little bit more about you. So again, would love for you to say hi in the chat, but we've got some poll questions for you because, as you know, we are all about gathering data. So few poll questions here. So if you could give those an answer, that'll really just help us make sure that we are tailoring what we're talking about specific to you. So we'd like to know what your role is, what size of organization you're working with, and also how are you doing? Where are you in the journey? And finally, outside of the actual poll bit, we'd love to find out what are the burning questions or the burning question that brought you here today. What was it that you saw that made you want to join this webinar? Or what is it that's going on that you'd really love an answer to? So that we'd love for you to either post in the chat, or if you'd like to be anonymous, you can post via the Q&A, and you can post that anonymously to us, and I believe no one else will see it unless we accept it as a question, but you can actually set yourself to be anonymous there. So we'd really love to hear from you, and as Adnan mentioned, throughout you can post any questions in the chat and in the Q&A, and we'll make sure we get to them either in this session, or if we can in a future session, it'll shape what we do next. So as you're doing that, and Adnan will release that once we have enough people. But in the meantime, I'll take you through the agenda of what we're planning to do today. So the first thing we want to talk about, what does it actually mean to move from founder to leader? What is the difference between those two things? How to create a culture where everyone feels safe, and finally recognizing when you need help. And we'll have a little something to support you to put into action, and then, as we said, we'll go through your questions. So Adnan, do we have enough results to share, or do we want to give people more time with that? All right, it looks like we have the results. So 22% of you are founders, 70% on a leadership team, 61% care about leadership, but not a founder in a startup or scale up, but really good that you care about leadership. I mean, obviously we're thinking specifically about that startup journey, but there will be a lot that you can take away about leadership from this session as well. And then in terms of the breakdown, size of the organization, so the biggest group is in that 100+ group, and then that's 47%. So, well, about 50-50 in smaller organizations versus larger organizations. So thanks so much for sharing that. Super helpful. And we do have the majority of folks that think they're a good leader, but want to confirm and improved. Let's see, one other, so that'll be interesting if they want to share in the chat. And then yeah, well, okay, fantastic. So funnily enough, nobody to business keeping their business alive to be a leader. Well, that's great. You're on the way already, and I see that people are actually posting key questions in the chat already, so that's great. We will do our best to make sure that we come on to them, and as I said, if we don't get to them today, we will make sure that we do a follow-up session, but we should have time to address those at least in the Q&A. So I think the first thing that we want to talk about is what is actually the difference between a founder and a leader. And I do talk to a lot of founders who tell me that they don't have time for culture or people development. And these are absolutely brilliant people doing brilliant work who are struggling to break out of the cycle of survival and move on to building an organization that is fit for the future and that can tackle any challenge and respond to issues. And to be perfectly honest, it's something that I can struggle with myself as well. And obviously, this is what I do and I think about every day. But I also have the reality of what it means to be a solo founder, who has people that are relying on her to pay their salaries at the end of every month. So it can certainly be a challenge. But one of the pieces of bad news about being a founder is that what got you here is not necessarily the thing that's going to get you to the next stage. So to found a company and get people to join you at the early stages, whether that's employees, investors, customers, you really have to be a visionary. You have to be in selling mode and you have to be across everything. But as you take that idea, that vision with great promise, and want to build it into a business, there's a whole new different and somewhat opposite in some ways set of skills or behaviors, habits, as we like to think about them, that you need to develop. And the other thing that we find is that you can't really look at billion-dollar exits and what they've done because they're typically outliers. And if you've ever looked at one of those articles profiling somebody who's lived to over 100, there's always that fun question, what's your secret? And it's often something a bit quirky, like drink a pint of Guinness a day. And what scientists will tell us who've actually studied these people is you can't learn anything from them. And yes, sadly, it's not about drinking a pint of Guinness every day. But the fact is they are genetic outliers. They were born that way. They are always going to live to that age. And there's absolutely nothing you can learn from them. And similarly, when we look at founders of unicorns, if you dig into the story, there's often a confounding factor, something like inherited wealth, or an investor that just really, really, really liked them, and despite every evidence to the contrary, kept plowing money into their business. So there's often something unique that helped that person get ahead that wasn't necessarily related to the smart things they did in their businesses. So it's hard to extrapolate from those things. And partially that's because the sample size is so small. So you're not going to get an answer there about what they did or didn't do that made them that successful. So one of the things, and I think I'm gonna go over to Brian now, who's gonna talk a little bit more about this idea of celebrity advice, and how we should be interpreting it or using it. Brian,
Thank
over
you,
to
Melissa.
you.
Yes, we're calling it the Steve Jobs paradox because stories about Steve Jobs, of course, have grown into mythological status, as do stories of unicorns. And for a number of years, it was always Google was really the benchmark, and startups would say, well, at Google they do this, and now it's you take your pick. I mean, now it's Meta, or it's something from Sam Altman, or it's a different kind of a company that is really so far removed from the person who's looking for advice and their startup and their situation that it's just not helpful. I'm a big believer in considering the source of the advice and how closely the context actually matches the your situation. Because just as Melissa said, it might be interesting to hear stories about people who have a Mediterranean diet, and maybe a Mediterranean diet is largely positive rather than largely negative. That's not going to be the thing that's actually going to give you the long life. It's their genetic context, which isn't your genetic context. So I think it's important to not over-index this kind of celebrity advice. It's important to not elevate it to a sense of too much meaning, because there are many examples of other kinds of organizations and other kinds of leaders who are not famous, who do not have this backstory that Melissa talks about. I know a number of non-governmental organizations that deal with international aid development and international reconstruction and conflict management, and they are doing incredibly effective and groundbreaking things in terms of community development and change, and how to move people from very entrenched positions to a position of more openness and to real problem solving. And commercial organizations, for-profit companies would really benefit from spending a little bit more time expanding their lens of what sort of advice they're actually taking in. And this applies to individual leaders as well, because nothing hurts so much as a founder or a leader in a startup who really takes all of the Steve Jobs wisdom to heart and comes in and kind of cosplays Steve Jobs to someone in the organization, someone they actually care about. And the founder thinks, well, this piece of advice will just get it done. But it really, really doesn't fit. It's really a misfit, and it ends up doing much more harm than good.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was just a comment in the chat about a lot of this can be related to this idea of survivor bias, and that's absolutely true. And yes, one of the great examples of survivor bias was in one of the wars. The fighter planes came back with bullet holes in the hull of the plane, and so the first response was, well, we need to strengthen this part of the plane. But no, these are the ones that actually came back. The ones that didn't come back were the ones who got shot in the wings. So yeah, so absolutely. And I think you have a chart, Brian, to help us with understand this sort of transition from the founder mode or founder starting point to getting to that.
Absolutely. And it's all based on this notion of what is a founder and what is a leader. And talking about this transition, it's important to understand what I consider to be the classic definition of a startup, which has two components. One, a startup exists in extreme uncertainty, and its survival is very, very fraught, and things are very risky, and the future is really undetermined. And two, a startup really doesn't know how to learn. The nature of the uncertainty causes so much chaos, and there's so much going on just to survive, that there really isn't an opportunity, and there usually isn't even the awareness that the founder, in order to get out of this phase, needs to be able to step back and see the things that need to be learned by the group and then passed on to others, so that they in turn can learn, and then the organization can move forward. Most founders are so busy just banging away at the things that they know. They're banging away at to Melissa's point, they're banging away with the capabilities of what got them here, that they don't have a sense of direction as to what will get them there. It's very hard for a founder to set down an old and familiar and really comfortable capabilities in order to pick up new and necessary and completely uncomfortable responsibilities and obligations. But leadership itself is about creating and maintaining an environment where others will be successful. And the work of the leader is to get things done through others. And the leader then keeps the shape of the organization intact during that phase. So this is the transition of going from founder doing everything to leader recognizing that their job is fundamentally different. Their tasks are fundamentally different.
Yeah, and actually, I just wanted to add to that piece because I know we've got a number of people on the call who aren't in startups, but it
Yep.
also speaks to my experience as an innovation director in a large multinational organization where I was leading a team who was trying to do something differently. And my role in getting that business case approved for this new idea from actually executing the new idea completely changed. One from that visionary role who was across every single piece of detail to one who was really more about protecting my team and enabling my team to be able to execute it. Now, what I was protecting them from was a bit different in that world, but it's that same transition. I think
Yep.
that can be made from someone who's trying to drive innovation and be that leader or entrepreneur internally in a larger organization.
Absolutely. And this is another distinction between leadership and management, and the kind of common conflict-based comparison, I think, is kind of ridiculous. Leaders are great people and managers are bureaucrats. I mean, all that is nonsense. One of the real differing characteristics, the tone, is the sense of direction. And leadership is about the future. Leadership is about the unknown. Leadership is about things that we aren't very certain of. So we're trying to plot a course and put things in this direction that we want to go. And how do we marshal all of those resources, and how do we get people along the journey with us? Management really is about the past. It's about things that we understand largely, things that we've determined and decided on largely. So when you talk about, you manage a financial audit, you pretty much know everything that goes into a financial audit, but you lead a fundraising round because there's a lot more uncertainty, and there are management components in that. But there's a real difference there in the sense of, are we going forward into the unknown future, or are we talking about something in the past that we've more or less uncovered and determined?
Yeah, absolutely. So take us through
Yeah.
the chart.
So very quickly, this is from several sources over the years that I've used. It's not exhaustive. It's not immutable. It's not even linear. It's just that this it's thematic, really. And the point of the table is that there's an organizational journey or an arc, and founders and leaders, especially in early stage companies, need to be aware that this is actually what's going to be happening. The organization is going to have many distinct stages and phases, and all of the changes that happen in the company, whether they're visible changes like hiring new people, or whether they're invisible changes like the elephants in the room that nobody is addressing, they will all go into how the stages and the phases of the company are either cohesive or they're fragmented, whether they're positive or whether they're negative, whether they're progressive or whether they're regressive. And the thing is that leaders and founders really are the context keepers, and this is a key element of leadership. A leader gets to say, a founder, CEO gets to say, we're in this phase on the left. We're in a highly uncertain phase. It's very risky. It's very fragile. That's why we need to watch every penny we spend. That's why we will only focus on the most valuable activities. We're not going to focus on the knucklehead, time wasting distractions that our competitors get bogged down in. But that's the reason we do this. That's the reason we make these decisions, is because we just don't have the ability to be distracted. And it's incredibly empowering for a leader to be able to do that. But it also requires a lot of bravery, because if you set the context, you actually then have to live with those decisions and live with that motion. And that's why some leaders are reluctant to do that. They're reluctant to plant the flag and say, this is where we are. And my job is to get us through this phase so we can get to the next phase and the next phase and the next phase.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that the next question, the next big question is, how do we actually get there? And really fundamentally, the mission is to build a culture where everyone feels safe. And what do we mean? What do we mean by that? This is sometimes known as psychological safety. And the way that we define it is where a diverse group of people with different perspectives all feel safe to share ideas, challenge, take risks, and speak up. And sometimes this is interpreted as everybody being nice to each other and not being able to say a wrong word and being really tentative, but it's really not that. It's actually a feeling of mutual respect, which means that you can challenge each other, you can disagree, but you disagree, but when you do, and when somebody disagrees with you, you don't stop feeling like you belong. You don't stop feeling respected. You take it with the feeling that this is something that I can learn from, and I can build on, or I can try to convince them otherwise because they respect my opinion enough that they'll listen to me countering what they're presenting. And this is especially important in engineering organizations, because you're building things that are going to shape our future, and in many ways come associated with a lot of risk. And you need that diverse group of people, those diverse perspectives, in order to make sure that you're looking at the problem from every angle and identifying possible ways that harm can be caused, the unintended consequences of whatever it is you're trying to develop. And obviously, whenever you're looking at a problem to be solved, the more diverse perspectives you have, the more creativity you're going to come at to answer those questions. And when we talk about diversity in this sense, we mean in every sense, in terms of background, in terms of life experiences, in terms of identity, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of gender. All those things shape how we experience the world. And if we all have a similar journey to that, or experience the world in a similar way based on having similar characteristics, we're going to be limited in our worldview. So it's about adding that, creating that environment. And making sure that that's the foundation of your business as the core definition of leadership, I think.
Absolutely. And another way of how we get there is founders, leaders, managers need to focus on the fundamentals. And as we've been talking about, it's things like vision and goals and clarity and communication and feedback and caring. And there are a couple of people who are asking questions about high performing teams and what's the best way to have a high performing team. Best way is to actually is first to see that it's your role as the manager or the leader to be responsible for the high performance. Over the years, I've met a fair number of leaders and managers who think that it's the team's responsibility to be high performing. In a way, there's a hands-off approach. There's this notion that, well, if I hire some rock stars, we'll have a high performing team. But the reality is that teamwork in and of itself is so hard because the team leader, the leader, the manager, the founder, the coach, for sports analogies, that's the person who actually has to have the discipline and the clarity and the consistency, fairness and the consistency to do this day in and day out. So the short answer to, if you're a manager who wants a high performing team, you have to first be a high performing manager. And you focus on the fundamentals. This is not magic. This is not trying to come up with a it's not trying to, we're not trying to discover an alternative to gravity here. Leadership and management, they're very observable, teachable, and learnable skills. And the trick is that it comes at a personal cost, because the more you have leadership, responsibility, and authority and power, if you're doing this ethically, the less it's about your personal preference. And many people, and you and I were just talking about this, Melissa, earlier, many founders think that they will become leaders almost by osmosis. And if they're good people, if they have good intentions, and if they have a company that's trying to solve, we're going to change the world, so therefore we're not going to be evil, so I'll transition from a founder to a leader. It doesn't happen accidentally. It happens very intentionally, and it requires personal sacrifice. You have to recognize that it's not about telling people what to do or even getting your own way most of the time. And this is where founder mode, this is where it comes crashing into reality. You get the celebrity notion of founder mode, and you get the Silicon Valley weirdness of it all put together. And founder mode basically says, it's problematic because it says, I'm the founder and it's going to be my way because I am the founder. But there's no learning in that approach. There's certainly no diversity. And that's not how complex problems are solved over time by groups of people who are committed to this common and shared purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And to get a group of people committed to that shared purpose, they have to feel some ownership to it, right? They have to feel trusted. They have to feel like they have a unique role in delivering it. So building and showing that trust is critical. And I think that what you said earlier about the founders thinking, if I'm a good person, that will extend to the culture of my company. And I think one of the things we find over and over and over again is intention is simply not enough. Good intentions. I believe there's a quote of right? Yes, of course. We all know that.
Sure.
But we won't deal in cliches, but yeah, no, action, you need action. And to your point, there was a point where my team wasn't performing as well as they had been. We weren't having as innovative and open conversations. And so I got some feedback, and my low scoring behavior was I wasn't asking open questions to understand people's point of view. So I was in founder mode, and I was just plowing through, assuming I understood and moving on. Which then led my team to think, she doesn't really care. I had no idea I was doing it. Wasn't my intention at all. But it's those things that then create that environment.
Yep. And just very quickly, oddly, this happens in really small organizations or really large organizations for different human reasons. But at the very small organization, at the startup level, at the growth stage level, there's just a lack of understanding of what's needed in order to activate people and convene them and really get them moving in the right direction. There's just a lack of insight, really. In large organizations, there's all of this stuff that surrounds large organizations that prevents this kind of energy. So this is when we talk about from founder to leader, we really could be saying in any organization where you go from a position of again being an individual contributor or not being responsible for some future direction, but being responsible for any future direction involves this transition, and that's the middle column. The transition is where the work is.
Yeah, absolutely. And now you mentioned that it's not the team's responsibility to be high performing or to create that high performing
Yeah.
culture. And I think you've got a couple of other people you want to point out whose job it is not.
Yes, well, at the startup level, I think there's a belief. There's been a belief for a number of years that the board or investors will be somehow overseeing this. And the reality is that even the best intentioned venture capitalists, investors, board members, they don't have the operational visibility into the company to really get into these things. Most of them don't have the personal disposition to want to get into what's actually a pretty intimate dynamic of helping a founder or CEO with their leadership. And in a lot of cases, it's just not really something. It's not work that they want to do. I mean, they're focused on looking at larger inflection points in the company's journey, and usually they're financial inflection points. But there's a there is a sense there's a sense that this happens, and unfortunately, a lot of venture capitalists want to promote this when they talk about being founder friendly. They will promote this idea that they are right there, shoulder to shoulder with a shovel with the founder. But when you pull out and you look at especially large funds, the number of companies that a VC is involved in, the number of boards, the number of advisory roles, the number of internal firm politics, the number of limited partners that they have currently, the number of their own fundraising cycles they have. I mean, all of this is just really going to get in the way of an investor's capacity to get involved in this, even if they want to. So this is really on you. As either a founder CEO, or if you're in a larger corporation, it's on you to seek out people who probably aren't the traditional, who may not be the traditional resources, to get feedback and to get some understanding of how you can plot your way forward. But then, of course, it all becomes about timing, and it all becomes about how you actually get help, ask for help.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a list about all the ways that startups fail. And this came
Yeah.
from some research. No, sorry, actually before I get to that, I think we want to talk about the timing of
Yeah.
it, right? About so do I have much runway? Do I have much space to do this?
Well, usually no. And this part of this also depends on different regions. I mean, in Silicon Valley, they're usually, well, I shouldn't make two broad statements, but you'll have some investors will give you lots of money and lots of time. Other investors will give you not much money and not much time. And sometimes, those two circles conflate into a Venn diagram. But the reality is that it is time sensitive, because you really do have to recognize that the decisions you're either making or not making in a leadership role are all being experienced by the people around you. And leaders are very, very good, because humans are very, very good at compartmentalizing these things and thinking, as you said at the top, oh, I'll get to it later, or things are
Yeah.
going well, so we don't have to do it, or I don't have enough time, or whatever the rationalization is, the justification. I call it an alibi, because you say, oh, no, I can't do that because I'm somewhere else. And that's not the totality of the dynamic. What's happening is that people around you, underneath you in the company, are experiencing your decisions or your lack of decisions, or your inconsistent or your unfair decisions, or your fair and consistent decisions. So these are the things that ultimately will contribute to organizational debt, and this sense of we don't have the resources or the organizational currency to spend to help us get out of the bad times, because the bad times are coming. So it is time sensitive. Even if you think that life is good right now, it's not always going to be good. And the way that you get out of the hole that the company will fall into at some point is by planning for that and making sure that that you always have some sense of how you're going to recover.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We were just talking to an organization the other day who hadn't been very active because their culture was a good one, was positive. But then they went through some difficult times. So now they're
Yeah,
looking at it. And on the other side, we've got a couple of organizations who are doing really well, and they've been really active, and through that activity have identified some spots that could become issues later, or could have become issues later, but they've addressed them. So
yeah,
it's about avoiding those really difficult times. And we know that there are a number of reasons why startups will go into difficult times. And we've got a list from CB Insights of the
yeah.
top. I love the first one, ran out of cash. I mean, that's sort of like, that feels to me more like the outcome rather than the actual
Yeah.
problem. But there's something that every single one of these has in common. And what is that? Well, it's that people are the ones who have to
People.
face these problems, right? People are the ones that either successfully
Yeah.
face these problems and deal with them, or don't. There was one organization, one startup we were working with a couple of years ago, and they were doing fantastic, right? They almost accidentally got their Series A funding, were approached by an investor, and everything was growing great. And they started the process for Series B. But not only did they not get there, but they ended up having to scale down the business because of bad decisions that were made in that time. And the decisions were around how they approach their target market, spending big money on employee perks that employees didn't really care about, employees not really being fully on board with the direction. And when we dug into each of these issues, it came down to things like a lack of accountability, or leaving decisions with a small group of the trusted founding team without expanding it out, lack of communication, or clearly defining what the expected behaviors were from folks. So, I think whenever we dig into any of these challenges, what we're going to uncover are, because people are at the core of all this, and whether or not you've equipped your people and you have a team surrounding you to navigate through these challenges, because these challenges are going to happen to every company, every team, anybody trying to build and sell something at any point. It's how you're able to navigate your way through that's going to determine whether you're successful or not. Now, obviously, there are sometimes outside, I mean, the pandemic, I mean, there is certainly outside things that mean that no matter what you do, you might not be able to make it. But your only chance is if the people on your team can come together and solve these problems together. And as a founder, or as a leader, as an individual, you can't tackle these on your own. You're not going to be able to figure
Absolutely.
out on your own. So this brings us to the first cell that I want to talk about, and that first set of behaviors, and that is about valuing feedback. And now we had a previous session on valuing feedback, which we talked a lot about giving specific feedback, and also a bit about asking for feedback, and a lot of that was around retention. But now I want to talk about the sort of the other three core behaviors: actively seeking opportunities to learn, proactively seeking feedback, and responding positively with interest to views that are different to your own. And this is especially important for leaders and founders or strong visionaries within their organization, because you're so identified with the idea or the business that people might find it difficult to share anything negative or constructive. And if things are generally good, and I think many people on this call said things are generally good, then you might not even notice the cracks that start to appear. Your people might not notice the cracks that start to appear, which is why you need to embed a process in order to find them and identify them. Find them before those little cracks become a chasm and your business falls into it, like that company that I just spoke about. So this is a really key factor, I think, in making sure that you are creating those high performing things and teams. And for those of us in innovation and product, it's also about like iterating on yourself. Sorry, that sounds awful and jargony, but it's about that constant idea of improvement and being open to, what worked before might not work now, or, someone like me who was really great at creating space for people to have ideas, but then went through an intense period and started just plowing through and trying to get through meetings and didn't even realize I was shutting people down or shutting people out. So actively seeking feedback and finding structured ways for your team to share it with you. If you are at a point where you can do that anonymously, even better. And the reason I say structured is getting back to this idea of people might not actually know what's wrong, but if you are mapping this, then you can spot where the issues are. An example from us internally is that we did our belonging survey and we scored agree on most things, but some were strongly agree and some were just agree. And so that enabled us to dig in and ask each other some questions about why that was. And we came up with some things that we were doing that we didn't even realize. If we had said, hey, how are we doing in meetings? We'd have been like, yeah, fine, great, everything's fine. But because we had that structure, it prompted us to be able to highlight something. So the next set of behaviors I want to talk about are in our embracing failure cell. And I think these are the two top ones sort of build on this idea of learning, acknowledging the things I don't know and changing my behavior by learning from my mistakes. And again, that's just building on that. You need to be constantly evolving. And the bottom two behaviors on responding positively when your team takes considered risk, that's an important one to make sure that you're showing that trust to folks, that you're letting them take their ideas and experiment with them. And we say considered because we don't want people, say, playing fast and loose with data or doing things that might cause harm, but it is about letting people take chances and supporting them in that. So that helps develop that culture of trust and means that everything is not sitting just with you. And this helps people with that focus on what they need to deliver. So if you think about developing yourself at this point and your culture is a distraction to the work that needs to be done, I think my argument is that it's the thing that prevents distraction. So if you don't do this work, you as a founder or as a leader in your larger organization are going to be pulled into every decision, are going to be asked for your feedback and approval on everything. And that's going to distract you from the hard work of actually building and growing and scaling your idea. So by helping your team develop in this way, you're setting yourself up to have fewer distractions. And so finally, the last cell with the behaviors is around communicating your culture. And all of these behaviors are important, but they kind of hinge on the first one. You have to make expectation clear so that you can hold each other to account. And when we talk about that, we mean specific behaviors, because getting back to that organizational example, they had a set of values, but they didn't really properly define them. So they actually ended up arguing with each other about who wasn't living up to the values, the leader or the leaders or the employees. And that's because it was never really established what this actually meant, so everybody could take it and interpret it in their own way. And the other thing that's really important about this is if you detail out the specific behaviors, then it becomes less about identity, less about intention, and it makes it much easier to get high performance, manage for high performance without having to massage egos or help people work through some really difficult challenges to who they think they are. We find one of the most significant ways that people get stuck in terms of not taking on feedback or advice is when they feel like it contradicts who they think they are. So if you tell me that I'm not ambitious enough, or I don't care about my work as much as I should, or anything like that, and that goes counter to who I think I am, I'm going to have a very negative reaction, and I'm going to get just block on everything else that you say to me. If you say instead, I'd like you to not just to look for other ways of doing something that you think might be better, or say no to things that you don't think are going to advance our outcome. Those are actually specific behaviors that I can put into practice, but don't question my identity or my intention or who I believe myself to be. And it also gives people you can't know what's inside someone's head. So what you want to avoid is telling them what's inside their head and then getting into a pointless argument about whether or not it is inside their head. Because actually, it's not your business what's inside someone's head. It's your business about what they're actually doing in your business and how they're reacting to other folks. So that's my biggest ask here. And we're going to move on to sort of the last section here about recognizing when you need help. And and I think one of the key things to know is that if your investors tell you that it's time to think about leadership, it's probably too late. And I think Brian alluded to this earlier. If they start asking questions about this, it means they've seen something that has caused concern. So basically, you want to identify that you need some help or support before your investors actually see that, because it's at that point you're already sort of moving towards that list of these folks might not be the ones who are going to be successful. So you want to avoid that. And one of the other things I wanted to share with you, something to look out for that has come out of our data, is that what we're finding is that people who are scoring lower on positive behaviors are performing inconsistently. So the people that perform well, who are scoring high on positive behaviors, are doing that consistently. But the people who are scoring lower are not consistently not performing the behavior. They're performing the behavior to different people. So if we go back to me asking open questions, I'm not sure if this was true for me, but as an example, if I scored low on that, it's more likely that I was asking some people open questions and other people I was not. And what that means is I am being unequal in my treatment of folks. I'm more curious about some people's ideas than other people's ideas. So when you think about your own behavior, you might think about some examples of, okay, yep, no, I remember 5 times that I did that. Think about what is similar in those 5 times, and try to also think about times that you did not do it and what's similar about the times that you don't do it. Because what you might find is that you're only doing it with certain people, or you're only doing it in certain contexts. And that's a really important thing to be aware of, because again, how you build these cultures of trust is to make sure that you are equally asking folks. And there's this wonderful little thing called affinity bias, which just means I will find it easier to be curious about somebody whose interests are similar to mine. I might have better follow-up questions. I might know enough to ask a follow-up question if they have something similar to me that they're interested in. So what I want to do is make sure that I'm consciously with everybody saying, am I asking open questions of this person? And what I might find is that if somebody's more technical on my team than I am, I might not be asking those questions and trying to. And then when I do, I actually learn a lot and find some really interesting answers. So it's one of the things to think about, and to try to put a tool into place. Now, I do have a tool called Culture Plus that could help you with that. There are other tools, not as good, obviously, but something like that. But I think the thing that you always want to be cautious about, especially in startups and scale ups, is not sort of jumping to the really heavy HR tools too early. I speak to a lot of startups and scale ups who are doing like extensive detailed appraisal processes really early on. And you don't need to. If you don't have a promotion path, it's not really that necessary. You do have to have regular development conversations, but I think just think about your level of structure, the type of structure you're putting in, the types of tools you're using, and keep them as light as possible in the early stages, but something that's going to help you keep track from a data perspective, and also so that you can look over time of how you're doing as an individual and how folks in your organization are feeling and engaging. We also have an action plan for you, which we are going to share with you after the session. And in the action plan, you can choose a behavior that you want to work on, and then visualize the outcome if you do it positively. But then really importantly, visualize the obstacle and what you're going to do to overcome the obstacle. And the point of this is that you're doing the cognitive work ahead of time, which makes it far more likely that you're actually going to perform the behavior under stress when it's important. So this action plan, scientifically based, so will help you to actually put the behaviors into practice. And the other thing that I want to talk about too is this idea of fractional support, because I think one of the mistakes that startups and scale-ups make is in calculating the level and quantity of expertise they need, because often they need deep expertise, but not a lot of it. So they'll either promote someone who's been with the company since the beginning, or the job has simply grown around them, but they never had any other experience doing it. And so at the point where you actually need deep expertise, you have somebody who's still figuring out as they're going along. Or on the other side, they go big and find a big shot full-time hire and burn cash when really they need targeted advice, perhaps a mentor for the folks that came up through the organization, but they need that perspective. So I think that's the area where you could really make sure that you're getting that targeted support without a massive investment and more flexibility. And then we had a session last week on considering diverse perspectives. So I'm just going to refer you back to that one, but that's also a really important one to make sure that you are building and creating that diverse network in your early stages. And it does get progressively more difficult to change your culture as you grow. So do make conscious decisions about your culture, or well, it will make the decisions for you, essentially. So we're going to jump to your questions now. There are quite a few that have come in. So thank you so much for that. Do feel free to put some more in. But I think one of the ones, Brian, that
Yeah.
we got some good questions here,
good ones.
Brian. So
I can jump to a couple of them if you want.
yeah, go for it. Yep.
So how to avoid a hard charging and driven environment turning into a bullying culture. I think it's important to define your terms first. What do you actually mean by hard charging and driven? And who, from a power perspective in the organization, could actually be charged or driven over? And what are the things that you value as an organization in being hard charging? And where do you see those behaviors crossing the line into bullying? I mean, this sometimes in some organizations is pretty difficult to do this because these are the entrenched habits. So you take feedback, that actually anonymous feedback that says people with lower status and lower power are being bullied, and then that's a whole intervention process. But if you're looking at it more from a positive perspective as to how do we make sure this doesn't get out of control, you have to define your terms. You have to define the context of what hard charging driven means, why it's important, the value that's placed on it, and then what the opposite is that we won't tolerate. And then, of course, you have to have the discipline to not tolerate that, even if it's your star performer who crosses the line and starts bullying people. That's the fairness and consistency element that has to be part of ethical power.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as you said, it gets to that point of definition, right? Because somebody's definition of a driven environment can be taken and abused quite significantly, right? So when you detail out the behaviors that you link to that, that's a way of holding folks accountable. I think we have a bunch more questions and only a few minutes left. So what I will say to anyone who has to drop off, we will be recording this. So so we're going to go through all the questions. But I did want to just mention that we do have a demo of Culture Plus coming up actually on Friday. So if you were interested in learning more about that, we're going to drop a link in the chat to that demo. And we'd also love it if you subscribed. We've got another webinar coming up in a couple of weeks. Again, would love to have you there. And then we also have something really exciting coming up in January with actually has canapes and wine and stuff. So you won't hear about that unless you subscribe. So please do subscribe. And we really love to stay in touch. So so I just wanted to get those things out just in case folks had to drop off on the hour, but we will go through the questions that we had that we have on the Q&A, but something for you to do as we go through that. So so yeah, so we'll go back to the questions. Before, I just want to say thank you to everybody who did join us and who stuck with us, and massive thank you to Brian and Adnan for making sure that everybody's looked after and for setting everything up. And Brian, for all of your brilliant insights, which more to come. So stay with us if you can stay. I love this question of what do you do if the rock stars or founders are not ready to coach or share with team members?
You ready to take a swing?
Did you want to take that one? I've got an idea, but I'm curious if you wanted me to, do you want to start or do you want me to start?
So the first thing that comes to mind is getting to Melissa's advice about diverse perspectives. I mean, I would find out what others in the group think, and because I would imagine that there are some of these behaviors that aren't universally approved of, where people don't think that they're actually as big a rock stars as they are. I mean, the challenge with hiring rock stars and the classic rock band analogy is that you wouldn't want to hire 5 Mick Jaggers in your band. It just doesn't work. So, if that's the way that someone in charge is actually running things, there's probably going to be some actionable feedback if the group can do it anonymously and safely that will point some of these things out. That was my first thought. Melissa?
Yeah, I think great points. And I think the couple of things that I will add to that is that for founders, so obviously rock stars who are not founders, accountability is is absolutely critical, because if you let people get away with bad behavior, that's your culture. Somebody once said your culture is your worst performing, the worst behaviors that you allow. So everybody will see that that's acceptable for acceptable behavior. So accountability is absolutely key. If it's your founders, obviously it can be a little difficult to hold them accountable, especially if they have a majority of shares in the business. For them, data, I think, is really important, because if you can gather data and show them how people are feeling and what's happening, that might hurt them, right? Like that will have an emotional response, because a lot of founders really don't want people to be unhappy in their organization. So I think that's one way. And I think the second point to that is that when you want to get somebody to change their mind about something, one of the most effective ways to do that is to appeal to their values. So I think you want to understand what your founders value, and whether it's a fast exit, or whether it's a award somewhere, or if it's just about delivering a spectacular innovation and saving the world, and making the link to their behavior and how it is contradictory to that value. So those are really more goals than values, but your founders will value certain things. It might be merit, it might be fairness, it might be high performance, a driven culture, whatever it is. linking that back to their values, I think is really powerful. And I'm remiss, I should also mention, we've got a tell us what you thought thing poll up there. We're not going to reveal the results, so please be honest with us. Don't worry, you won't see us devastated live on air if you give us some negative feedback. But in the spirit of learning, we want to make sure that we are improving these and getting better. So please do, if you could, before you
Absolutely.
sign off, take a moment to share that. We had a question early on around leadership definitions and concepts changing constantly throughout their long career, and curious what the current ideology on the meaning concept of leadership is. Now, I feel like we spoke a lot about this throughout. So and this was at 4:08. So again, it might have been covered, but I just want to put that one to you, Brian, to see if there's anything that you wanted to talk about in terms of like a shifting perspective on that.
I think if anything, we just continue to move further and further away from the great man theory of leadership, and this idea of leadership with easy answers, and this idea of leader has magical powers, and these are progressive theories and themes and practices that have been in organizational circles for decades, and it just takes a long time to become to be popularized. But the notion of care and the reality of emotion, the reality of love, of companionate love in leadership. These are all concepts that have been bopping around for quite some time, and they
Yeah.
find a little more traction, a little more traction here and there, and then it seems like we get some great leader examples, and I won't name them, but they're always men, and they portray themselves as having all of the answers and being these sort of deities, and that sets the evolution and the learning back. But the better models are out there. The better models around ethical power and ethical leadership are out there, and they're not really new. They just go through different sort of 2 steps forward, 1 steps back kind of a process.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think we see this a lot in business, in that everybody's got to coin a new term for things, right? Everybody's got to come up with a new theory in order to get the clicks and sell the books. Fundamentally, have the behaviors of great leaders really changed? I think there's been a perception shift, probably from the idea of gravitas and just being able to just project yourself to that more. It is about building those high performing teams and giving people the psychological space and having empathy. And we did a massive research project with a global organization, and what people's definition of leadership kept coming down to is the way they make me feel. They make me feel like they care about me and my ideas, and me personally. And that came up over and over again. That was
And
the
this gets
only.
back to the vulnerability of the leader, the vulnerability of the
Yeah.
person who has the authority and the obligation to look after others. So
Yeah.
again, this has been around for a long time, and isn't necessarily popular, but there are some major corporations that popularized this back in the 70s and the 80s around caring and love and leadership. And so the answers are out there. It's not going to be in the fast food sound bite Twitter sphere.
Fair enough, but it will be in an hour-long webinar hosted by
It
the
will be.
Honeycomb Works. Anyway, but we did have an earlier question when we were going through the feedback cell about organizations might feel that they seek feedback, but they're not getting any, and that no news is good news. So how do we shift that mindset from, well, nobody's telling us anything negative, so it must be good.
Why don't you start with this one, Melissa? Because it's specifically about the cells.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is why we need that structured process, right? Because if you just ask people, are you happy? Are you okay? Are things okay? A lot of times, again, unless things are absolutely terrible, people be like, yeah, sure, that's fine. But I think the question to them posed to founders, leaders, whoever it is, do you want to wait until you have to fire people because things have gone so badly? And you might not be able to be that direct with depending on what the power hierarchies are, but I think that's really what we're talking about, talking about here. And, it's the same as going, to your GP for a checkup and getting your tests when you hit certain ages and all, because you don't want to find out that you have something after it's inoperable, or after it's untreatable, or after it's too hard. I mean, we see over and over again people coming to us when it's gotten bad, and it's just that much harder to fix it, and you will lose people before you can right that ship. So I think, and depending on what type of organization, again, if you're in one of these engineering organizations, speaking in the language of engineering is a really good one. Safety precautions, procedures, and testing innovations and metrics and measurements, those are all really core and central to any engineering process. And I think what we're suggesting is that you look at culture with the same rigor as you do anything else that you would develop and build that has the potential to cause harm.
Absolutely. And the question of how do you change the mindset, in this case of feedback, if you're a manager or a leader, you first have to change yourself. So if you think that there should be more feedback, you better become an expert at feedback. You better become an expert at asking for and providing, and most importantly, receiving feedback. If you're up here in power, you better become really, really good at it. And so it's not something for somebody else to do about how do they change their mindset about feedback. Well, if I'm the boss, if I'm the founder CEO, it's my responsibility to show what's important for the organization through me. And these are the things we value. And no news is not good news. No news is no news. High performing organizations will share bad news so quickly. They'll share questions so quickly. The teams that trust each other will absolutely say, don't know what's going on. This kind of looks wonky. Can someone help me with this? Rather than, oh, I better not say anything, because the last time someone else said something, they got slammed. So if you want the mindset to change, you first have to be you have to be the exemplar of the new mindset.
I think that's such an important point that you raised, Brian. It is shifting that mindset to no news is really bad news. It means people don't trust you. I mean, there are some organizations that we launch our engagement survey with, and we get minimal take up, and that just tells us there is a severe lack of trust in the organization, and that's, no culture is perfect, no organization is perfect. And if you're not hearing if you don't understand any ways that you can improve, then you've got an issue. And the same way that you wouldn't have a product in the market, you wouldn't build a technology, have it in the market, and then assume that you never make any changes or improvements to it, right? You're going to be constantly gathering user feedback and data and metrics and all those kinds of things, just to keep iterating and improving. And it's the same thing when you look at your culture. It's
Yeah.
not a static thing, even if it was perfect in the beginning. Again, it never is. But let's
Yeah.
just assume, a lot of you folks said in the beginning, everything's fine, I'm doing
Everything's
great. So
fine.
let's just say you are today. Will you be tomorrow? Because it does change, and it changes really quickly. And once you
Yeah.
see it, once it's being obvious to you, then you're already in trouble. We got a question about hybrid teams and how you make, well, there's two different questions. One is around hybrid teams and building that inclusive culture when you've got a hybrid team. And then there's a question around the dynamics of creating performance in a matrix structure and how to build up an organization to benefit from that structure. I don't know if those two things are super linked, but I thought that's sort of like in these different challenging environments, how do we make sure that we're optimizing the culture piece?
I'll start with the matrix.
Yep, sounds
I think
good.
the principles are broadly the same. I think in a matrix organization where you have different reporting lines, and maybe someone is doing some work for a group or a manager who is not their actual manager, I think it's simply important to have a structure that everybody follows, that's consistent, that everybody sits down and says, look, we now have 3 people in this relationship rather than, sorry, that's my bad triangle. We have 3 people in this relationship rather than 2 people. So there's the manager, there's the direct report, and then there's the person to whom the direct report is working. And we assume that there are a number of people doing this in a matrix context. So it's basically just emphasizing and becoming an expert on clarity, on goals and on roles and responsibilities, and on clarity and communication and feedback. These are all fundamental things. But the more moving parts you put into the human dynamic, the more you have to pull back and announce. There are lots of moving parts in this human dynamic. We need to be extra careful and extra precise and extra clear about these things. And that's going to be really the vision, the cultural and organizational vision for that particular project or dynamic. So you start by naming the things, and then as long as the process is fair and consistent for everyone involved, you will be able to see where the gaps are, and you'll be able to make some adjustments along the way. That's my initial response to it.
Yeah, and I think that applies equally to the question about a hybrid group where folks aren't all in the same place. I think calling that out and being intentional about it. I think when we had 100% of people working remotely, it was much easier. When we have 100% of people all in the same place, it's much easier. When you've got a mix, then you have to be really intentional about making sure that everybody is having the same opportunities to share their ideas, to communicate, to socialize to some degree, to have that flexibility. So I think you have to be really, really thoughtful about it, and
Yeah.
and make sure that the more specific you are about all of these things and what's expected,
Yeah.
the better off you're going to be. And I think checking in with people too more often
Yeah.
is a lot more important, because you don't have it's not as easy to take a temperature when you're not situated in the same place with
Yeah.
folks, where you're not seeing them at the tea kettle or whatnot. So making sure that you bake that in, absolutely crucial. I think that's probably the last question that we had. I think we've covered them all. But again, thank you so much, and thank
Great
you so much to
questions.
the
Thank
folks
you
who
so
are
much.
still hanging on with us. Wonderful to have you still with us, and yeah, and great questions. So really appreciate you all chipping in. Really do hope you found it helpful. Again, would love for you to give us your feedback on the forum. And yes, thank you, Adnan. I want to leave you with a quote from the immortal Ice-T, who says, "If you're really a leader, you dictate what the culture is. You don't let the culture dictate you." So I think that's something to think about when we think about leadership. I know sometimes you can get a bit frustrated and say, what's going on here? But if you are a leader, you are going to dictate the culture and help your team become that high performing team. So thank you again. We really do hope you will stay in touch. As I mentioned, there's a demo of the Culture Plus platform on Friday. That is with the team from the Royal Academy of Engineering, who are lovely people. Actually, I think Eric might be here too. He's the one that will show you around the platform if you're interested. That's this Friday. We'd love to see you there, and we'd love to have you involved in our community, in our Culture Plus community. I was going to say family, but no, it's not about family. It's about support. It's our community. Lovely group of people already there. So yeah, thank you, and keep an eye out for the next one. It's in a couple of weeks, and hope to see you there. Thank you, everyone.